The Liberation of Sundrian City by Andrew Lewis. Chapter 19. The Will to Death. Dinner was another takeaway meal for Linus, who, inundated with an overbearing desire to sleep, retired to his room with a good amount of roast pheasant and a large chunk of bread, wrapped in a kitchen cloth. A million thoughts flickered in his mind, but they resided in a space that was clouded by a fog of exhaustion, as if too much was going on in there for his mind to comprehend all at once, and as a small gesture of mercy his mind had shut away the thoughts to disallow the anxiety to amass. But alas, it would come. Like a flock of vampire bats migrating to his mind, the anxiety would come to take harbour. And this plague would start its influx that very night in his dreams. Dreams of haunting laughter, Deimos and Robin and Evander all enjoying the spectacle of his torment. When he awoke it was in a sweat, and with a heaviness that weighed on his mind and muscles the same, both tense and slow to react in equal measure. But listening to the thudding of the fist along the doors, he remembered the last time he ignored it and the consequences, and he dragged himself up and sat on the corner of his bed, rubbing his eyes, waiting for his mind to kick back into life. In the dining hall, Linus was sat slumped beside Alman, still trying to wake. He ate his bread and eggs and didn't say much until his stomach had settled. Alman had already eaten and was soon to leave for the Elephant Reserve, but when High Lord Ramil Colwich entered the room alongside Deimos, he changed his mind and decided to sit and find out why. The usual announcements came first. From the commander, Linus was to report to the Elephant Reserve immediately after the assembly. Then came Ramil's chance to speak, and so he took to addressing the group. "Good morning, gentlemen," he began. "I won't hold you too long, but I must announce that I am to depart on another expedition this afternoon. It is short notice, and I apologise for that, but I trust in you all to step up and fulfil the extra security requirements in my absence. It's something of an emergency mission, the details of which I cannot say at this early stage. I am sure you understand." He spoke in an almost loving way, a tremendous amount of respect and admiration in his voice. "There is good news, however. The expedition should be relatively short. I expect to return within 1 week, hopefully less, with a full report to be given on arrival, of course. Again, I thank you all for your professionalism, and must now bid you farewell and good luck." And with that, he shuffled his way out the door, pausing to execute small bows and waves as he did. "So soon?" asked Linus to Alman. "I guess it's like he said, an emergency mission." Training was more of the same. Missy was impossible, and Linus maintained his patience and experimented with new techniques to slow him down, none of which worked. His attention, however, was divided, for he could not get the coming rest day off his mind. Wondering which rider it might be or which elephant, he fantasized that the human-shaped sandbag was churned, and he wasn't at all annoyed at Missy for stepping on the vital organs too soon. He was also thankful that the session would be over before the sun grew to its full force. It was looking to be a hot day, and an early finish was definitely welcome. He had already decided that he would help in the barn after training finished, and that is what he did, tinkering away with Alman on the saddle harnesses, washing the beasts and preparing their food. He enjoyed the work. The monotonous labour helped to keep his mind off the impending rest day execution. The next 2 days were much of the same for Linus, training, working with Alman and thinking. Fantasies of the execution played in his imagination almost constantly, and as the time came nearer, his anxiety grew and grew. He began to feel that the execution would offer some closure for him, as if once it had occurred, his life would again gain some clarity and structure. It would be a new chapter, a turning point, from the very moment that the life was stomped out of churned onwards. It would be a significant weight off a mind carrying a massive excess of troubles. On the night before rest day, Linus attempted to sleep early, for sleep was an escape from the anxiety, which was now at boiling point. However, he was unable to sleep, and instead he stared at the small window above his bed and followed the weave of his thoughts, which tangled through his mind from here to there. Sometimes the thoughts were short and sharp, just the image of a stamping foot or the sound of 1,000 screaming lunatics, and others were long and detailed, like the memory of Churn brooding in the corner of the dungeon and Wesley weeping uncontrollably. He thought about how this had been the lead up to the poor man's death, agony and torment. He tried to comprehend his own luck, the fact that he had survived, but found it unfathomable. Such things were impossible to measure. He knew only that he had been incredibly lucky, too lucky, he thought. And then he thought of another thing, although this thought seemed to come from an external entity. No, you were supposed to live, Linus. Your life is far too important to flicker out just yet. He was surprised to have such a thought, and more surprising was how familiar it felt. It was spoken in the voice of an old friend, a man who would have once, not so long ago, supported Linus through anything. It was Evander's voice, and for a slight moment it was comforting. Then a new weave of thought began, and he relived the night of his parents' murders and the betrayal of the lifelong friend, and tears began to stream down, dripping to the bed in procession. Sleep was a lost cause now, a cruel absence, and it was as Linus came to realize this that a small mercy arrived in the form of a knock on his door. It was the same uniformed guard that delivered the last message, and he looked surprised to see Linus answer the door. I have a message for Linus. That is I. Aren't you the murderer? No, not anymore. I am Linus Smith. It felt nice to say this, and with a little too much cheek he asked, Now the message, if you would. The guard straightened himself, and without the use of a written note, as he had used last time, he spoke in his most professional of voices. Emperor Frigg requests your immediate presence in the Emperor's sunroom. He does? Why does he? He did not say. There was a moment's pause before Linus responded simply, Okay. For dinner, I expect, he said somewhat awkwardly, and with that the guard left. After straightening himself up in the mirror, Linus left his room and made his way to the Emperor's sunroom. He'd already eaten, but not a lot, for the anxiety had diminished his appetite somewhat. When he reached the large ornate doors of the sunroom, the guard swung them open without a word, as if he had been expecting him. Linus was surprised to see that Emperor Frigg did not sit alone, but was accompanied by 3 others, his daughter, Princess Robin, his commander, Ezekiel Deimos, and a woman that he had recognized from the orgy in the bathhouse. Come, welcome, please sit, he bellowed, instantly recognizable as the happiest person in the room by a long stretch. Linus, my boy, so nice of you to join us. He proceeded to the table and was horrified to see that the spot between Emperor Frigg and Commander Deimos had been left empty for him. His approach was quick but shaky. He gave a little nod to Robin as he passed, who looked equally disconcerted about the whole affair. Deimos didn't say or do anything whatsoever. Welcome, son. Yes, sit. Thank you, Emperor. Not at all. He tried hard not to sound awkward when he addressed the princess. Hello, Princess Robin. I hope you are well. Her response was casual, so casual that it threw Linus off guard a little. I'm fine, Linus. You hungry? Yes, a little, he lied. He had far too much on his mind to feel hunger. He began to feel a little awkward that he hadn't addressed Deimos, and so, with a good amount of fear, he turned and emitted an almost undetectable, Good evening, Commander. Good evening, he replied. He spoke in a way that suggested he was already growing impatient. The Emperor motioned to a servant shortly after, food began to stream in the doors. Large platters of roasted meats, fresh vegetables, and wine, of course. Linus served himself a small pile and picked at it while the Emperor spoke. Linus, Robin tells me that you will be joining us on the grandstand tomorrow. Yes, sir. Fantastic, that's great news. He looked quite happy indeed. Well, son, I have a surprise for you tomorrow, he continued, now almost looking giddy. Oh, a surprise? Asked Linus, pretending as if he didn't already know. Yes, a great big one. But you will have to wait until the rest day show, I'm afraid. Just know this, you will enjoy it. There was no reaction from Deimos. Rather, he seemed not to be paying attention to the conversation. You know, Linus, I'd hoped that you might be tomorrow's rider, said Emperor Frigg, and Deimos was certainly listening now. Linus began to feel panic as he remembered his promise to Princess Robin. If the Emperor requested he ride, how could he say no? But unfortunately, Deimos has already drawn another rider, he concluded with some relief to Linus. Somewhat disappointing, but we do have protocol we must follow. You truly are a talented rider, Linus. Skilled, naturally skilled. You know what I mean. Deft, chimed Princess Robin, somewhat unexpectedly. There was a brief pause before Emperor Frigg agreed. Yes, sweetheart, that's the word, deft. Quite good. Thank you, my darling. She responded to his affection with a roll of her eyes. Linus couldn't help but admire how she could show such contempt towards the Emperor. For the remainder of the dinner, the conversation was minimal. Neither Princess Robin nor Commander Deimos seemed to be in any mood for light conversation, and Emperor Frigg had his mouth full of food for most of the time. When it wrapped up, Linus thanked his hosts and made his way back to bed, where he lay awake for several more hours before finally falling into sleep.